It's 5:05 and welcome into a Wednesday edition of the Carolina Journal News Hour. News Talk 1110 99.3 WBT. I'm Nick Craig. Good morning to you. President Donald Trump has named 4 North Carolinians to a newly created council that will assess the future and the direction of the Federal Emergency Management Agency. This is, of course, after FEMA has faced a lot of heat from critics, which called a botched response out in western North Carolina and throughout the country elsewhere. Republican National Committee Chair Michael Whatley will lead as the head of the council, alongside Representative Chuck Edwards. He's the 11th District Congressman here in North Carolina. Virginia Fox out of NC5. Freshman Congressman and Tim Moore out of North Carolina 14. They were all named to the Federal Emergency Management Agency Review Council, which was created by executive order on Friday by the president shortly after he visited Asheville and Swannanoa. FEMA has faced intense scrutiny since Hurricane Helene impacted portions of western North Carolina. Hard to believe that was all the way back in September of last year, with criticisms ranging from running out of money to allegedly avoiding homes with Trump signs to victims being forced out of hotels at the last minute. In November, former FEMA Administrator Diane Criswell was grilled at a Congressional Transportation and Infrastructure Subcommittee hearing about some of the claims that the government agency wasn't doing enough to help Hurricane Helene and Milton victims. Milton, of course, affecting the western portion or some western portions of the state of Florida. Trump told reporters on Friday that he believes that disaster management should be led by the states and not the federal government. He said Friday, quote, "I think, frankly, FEMA's not good. I think when you have a problem like this, I think you want to go, and whether it's a Democrat or Republican governor, you want to use your state to fix it and not waste time calling FEMA." The panel will consist of no more than 20 members and meet for 1 year to create, quote, "a full-scale review by individuals highly experienced at effective disaster response and recovery, who shall recommend to the president improvements or structural changes to promote the national interest and enable national resiliency," end quote. Newly sworn in Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem and Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth will also serve as co-chairs of the council and oversee the committee. The council will produce a report for the president that will include an assessment of the adequacy of FEMA's response to disasters during the previous 4 years, including sufficiency of staffing and compensation for the FEMA response with state, local, and private sector resources. That will include things like timelines of response, supplies provided, efficiency, and services, including communications and electricity provided during that same period of time. In a press release, Chuck Edwards said, quote, Congressman Chuck Edwards says, quote, "It's an honor to be named by President Trump to the FEMA task force to fix how this broken agency works. After being on the ground throughout Hurricane Helene's response, it is clear that an overhaul of FEMA is necessary to more effectively and efficiently respond to natural disasters. I look forward to lending the insights I've learned so that our nation will be fully prepared to prevent and respond to future disasters and to save lives." We'll get into some other quotes from individuals, including Virginia Fox, coming up here a little bit later on in the program. It's now 5:09. You're listening to the Carolina Journal News Hour on News Talk 1110 and 99.3 WBT. Continuing our National School Choice Week discussion here on the Carolina Journal News Hour this morning, and we've got a new poll out at carolinajournal.com that digs into some education-related questions. To walk us through that this morning, it's my pleasure to welcome Bob Luecke, the director of the Center for Effective Education over at the John Locke Foundation. Bob, thanks for the time this morning. We've seen a lot of discussion up at the national level with the new administration about the future of the Department of Education. There is a question in the Carolina Journal poll about that. What were some of those details that you looked at in that question and some of those results?
Well, yeah, good to be here, Nick. Yes, you're right. We did ask a question on whether or not people would favor or oppose a move to abolish the Department of Education. As you know, President Trump had talked a lot about that. In fact, he's not the only candidate. I remember years ago, President Reagan also campaigning on trying to do the same. On the question that we asked, over a third of respondents had favored, such a move to abolish the department. About 51% oppose it, but that number, over a third of respondents, is still pretty eye-catching, and I think it warrants, attention from policymakers.
Yeah, the Department of Education is kind of synonymous with education. It's built right into the name of it. So I guess my question for you this morning, Bob, is if something like this were to move forward, if the Trump administration actually was to take this effort on and look at abolishing the Department of Education, I assume some of the response here is, well, you can't do that. Then we wouldn't have education across the country. How much is the Department of Education actually involved in children's classrooms across the state of North Carolina?
Well, they are. Obviously, they receive federal grants. I mean, as far as on the numbers side, North Carolina gets about $600 million for Title I program, which is federal aid for low-income schools. There's also free lunch programs, which is technically through the Department of Agriculture. But there's also other programs like student financial aid, which is for higher ed, but actually some of the administration is done through, high schools and things like that. So and also the Office of Civil Rights. So there are programs which, if polled on their own, people would like. Most people, I think, if polled individually, people would probably say don't get rid of this, but the actual practical aspects, of abolishing the department, policymakers would have to think through, okay, how do we want this program, to continue? If the public says so, it has to be, obviously administered elsewhere, because the department, which is involved in too many things, according to most people, and including myself, but, you have to figure out the practical aspects of this. There's ways to do it. There are ways to do it, but I think, unfortunately, policymakers aren't actually thinking this all the way through, because you have to figure out, okay, what are we going to do with financial aid? Cut back a lot of it, you can, but you also have billions in current programs, and if it's not going to be administered into the Department of Education, where do you put it? How do you put it? How do you administer that? How do you administer Title I, et cetera? Real practical questions, which there are answers to, but we're really not on that level of discussion. Policymakers aren't. They're just saying right now, abolish it. And I think people see, that there are a lot of things that we can do without in the department. It's micromanaging a lot of aspects of education at a local level that I think locals could well do themselves. But if we change things, we have to figure out, okay, how are we best going to administer some of the programs that people say they want, but still at the same time make it a leaner, more efficient government. And that's kind of where we're at. We have to figure out the specifics of this.
Well, and I think it's probably not all that different from the discussion that's going on right now in regards to FEMA, the Federal Emergency Management Agency. Can some of this be offloaded to the states? Can a lot of money be saved? Can some bureaucracy be cut out of it? So I guess my question to you is, could some of this be taken over by the states or by the local Board of Educations in all 100 counties here across the state to accomplish some of these same goals without it necessarily being under the umbrella of the Department of Education?
Yeah, that's a good comment, Nick, because I think that's a comparison worth looking at. There are a lot of factors that I think most people think that local school districts could do just as well. I mean, block grant some of these programs, put the decision-making authority down to the local level, provide the funds, but I think in many cases, I think you could reduce duplication and increase the efficiency of these programs if they were really administered at a local level.
We'll continue the conversation with Bob Luebke from the John Locke Foundation coming up after this. You're listening to the Carolina Journal News Hour. Where it's now 5:15, News Talk 1110, 99.3 WBT. It's time to get a look at traffic this morning. We'll get the update with Boomer Von Cannon.
Hey, thank you, Nick.
It's 5:20. Welcome back to the Carolina Journal News Hour, streaming live this morning on our Carolina Journal YouTube channel. You can also check out the podcast by taking it with you wherever you go by opening up your favorite podcast app, searching for the Carolina Journal News Hour, and tapping that subscribe or follow button. It's the Carolina Journal News Hour. Download and subscribe now. Applications for North Carolina's expanded Opportunity Scholarship Program are set to open here in just a couple of days. February 6th at 9 a.m. is when the portal opens for individuals to apply, and that will run for 1 month until March the 6th. That's according to a news release from the North Carolina State Education Assistance Authority, which is the state agency responsible for implementing the program. Opportunity scholarships are available to all K-12 students and is a state voucher program designed to enable families to choose a private education for their children. The Assistance Authority also announced new income guidelines and scholarship amounts for the program. Each scholarship is now valued at between $3,458 and $7,686 each year, and that's spread across 4 different income tiers, ranging from $59,000 a year for a family of 4 in the first tier to more than $267,000 a year for a family in the 4th tier. Those figures are about a 3% increase from where those numbers were last year. Students in the lowest income tier receive first priority. The General Assembly has funded the program at $625 million for the 25-26 school year, and the application period for the program, for the ESA Plus program designed for students with special needs, will also be open during that exact same time frame, February the 6th to March the 6th. Awards for ESA Plus may be used at an eligible private school or for approved education expenses, including for families who choose to homeschool their children. So, Opportunity Scholarships not going anywhere across North Carolina. You can read more details on that story this morning by visiting our website, carolinajournal.com, where it's now 522, News Talk 1110, 99.3 WBT. Continuing our discussion this morning with Bob Lubke from the John Locke Foundation about our new Carolina Journal poll that surrounds education across the state. Switching gears and looking at another question in our survey, there's a lot of parents that remain frustrated with the public education system. A question in the Carolina Journal poll. Overall, how satisfied are you with the quality of the K-12 education students receive today in your local schools? Bob, the response to this, probably not exactly what maybe some state lawmakers and education folks would want to see.
No, I think the numbers, and again, the actual numbers here, percent satisfied, 33%, dissatisfied, I think about 55%. And that's almost a 2-to-1 ratio there. That's pretty eye-popping. And actually, I think if I recollect correctly, it went up 7 percentage points, the dissatisfaction level. It had gone up 7 percentage points from last year. So the dissatisfaction with public schools is increasing, and that's something we really need to look at. I mean, delve into why. What's happening? I mean, is it curriculum? Is it safety? I mean, is it how schools are administered? Is it cost? What? That's something I think people really need to get a handle on. But right now, it just seems to be getting worse. Again, the point being, it's up 7 percentage points dissatisfaction from last year. Over half of respondents said they're dissatisfied with how the quality of the local public schools.
And I guess it might be accurate to say that maybe lawmakers have been a little bit ahead of this. There was this huge expansion of the Opportunity Scholarship Program last year. We're learning some details as we trek into the new General Assembly's long session this year. Question in the poll about the Opportunity Scholarship Program, that has overall and pretty bipartisan support. 60% of respondents say they either strongly support or somewhat support the Opportunity Scholarship Program. That seems to line up pretty closely with this general K through 12 public education satisfaction question.
Yeah, it's still a support for OSP is still about a 2-to-1 ratio. So that's strong. That's maintained, that level for the last couple years. And I think now as that program has grown and obviously expanded dramatically last fall. I think support for that will continue to grow as people see, that as a viable option for their children's education. I think, if I would, predict what that looks like in the future, I think support for that is only going to grow because it's a program that needs to be publicized more, because as I've gotten out, the different parts of North Carolina, there's still a lot of people that don't know about it. And I think as people, begin to access it and find out what it can do for kids and how it can impact the child's education, support for it will only grow. So I think good days are ahead for the Opportunity Scholarship Program.
And I really want to dig into this specifically for folks that are frequent readers of CarolinaJournal.com, for folks that follow North Carolina politics very closely. They have become accustomed to governors in the past, Roy Cooper, and we're likely to see similar comments from Josh Stein, actively opposing the Opportunity Scholarship Program. Bob, if you listen to some of those conversations, you would believe that this program was pretty broadly hated across the state. But again, the numbers don't seem to back that up at all.
No, the numbers don't. Support levels, they're over 50% for people of all political persuasions. Support is strong across all income, across regions of the state. And actually, a common lament of a lot of the opponents is that it segregates kids into, schools by races, et cetera. And if that was a bad thing, you'd think, whites and blacks would feel differently about it. But if you actually look at support levels amongst African Americans is higher for the program than it is for whites. So that definitely doesn't support that viewpoint.
And a lot of this kind of revolves around the idea of determining who is best suited for where your child should attend a school. And the overwhelming respondents in this poll, 78% of them said the child's parents or guardians. So it seems to me that parents have a vested interest, obviously, or guardians have a vested interest in their children, and they want to be the ones making some of those decisions about where they go and the kind of education that they're getting.
Yeah, was that 78? I thought it was about 71. Is that correct?
78%, yes, sir.
Okay, 78. Well, then that's actually gone up a little higher. We poll that question just about every year, and every year that I've been here, it's between the 70s and low 80s, which is, indicative of a strong public sentiment that parents should be in control of their child's education. That's been consistent, and if it's 78% now, it's actually gone up a little bit from last year. Now, what that means, obviously, is the sentiment, and then the public policy, choice needs to catch up to that, and I think that's what the legislature has been trying to do in the last couple of years with the expanding Opportunity Scholarship Program, the growth in charter schools, and then the growth in homeschooling as well. So. Yeah, that's reflective of a population that feels strongly about parental control. And, I think lawmakers, thankfully, have been taking note of that in recent years.
We'll wrap up our poll results with Bob Lubke from the John Locke Foundation coming up after this. You're listening to the Carolina Journal News Hour. Where it's now 5:29, News Talk 1110, 99.3 WBT. We'll get another look at the roadways on this Wednesday morning with Boomer Von Cannon.
Hey, thank you. WBT.
It's 5:36. You're listening to the Carolina Journal News Hour, News Talk 1110, 99.3 WBT. Keeping our eye on education this morning, North Carolina Representative David Rouzer, he is the congressman in the 7th Congressional District, introduced a bill last week in the U.S. House to eliminate the Department of Education, a move that Republican leaders have floated for years amid ongoing criticism of the federal government's influence in the public school system. The bill marks Rouzer's 6th attempt to abolish the agency since he was elected in 2014. Rouzer has proposed eliminating the agency during every congressional session thus far. In a statement to CarolinaJournal.com, the congressman said, quote, "I've introduced the State's Education Reclaimment Act in each Congress since I was first elected. Education should be handled at the state and local level without interference from the federal government. This bill takes the funding appropriated to the Department of Education and gets it back to the states to use for teacher pay increases, new schools, or whatever each individual state needs to enhance education." While elected leaders are increasingly interested in eliminating or downsizing federal agencies to boost government efficiency, as we talked about earlier this morning, the practicality of shutting down a federal office, it may be far more challenging than it may sound. We talked earlier this morning about Title I, and it's a federally funded program that provides financial assistance to schools with a high number of low-income students. The program helps schools improve education through extra support such as tutoring, teacher training, and educational resources to ensure that all students have the opportunity to succeed. And here in North Carolina, the state receives over $500 million a year in Title I funding from the Department of Education, in addition to over $1 billion for elementary and secondary level programs. A new Carolina Journal poll that we have been talking about this morning shows that half of voters oppose abolishing the Department of Education, with a majority of Republicans in favor and nearly all Democrats opposed. Both teachers, 40%, and parents, 39%, are more likely to support abolishing the Department of Education compared to non-parents and non-teachers. Just 3.5% of respondents believe the Department of Education, however, is best suited to determine where a child should attend school, making it the least favored option compared to parents, local, or state boards of education in making that decision. The Department of Education was established all the way back in 1979 by President Jimmy Carter through calls to eliminate the agency began upon its inception. Just 3 years later, President Ronald Reagan called for an end to the department during a State of the Union address and argued that decisions about education should be made at local levels. The federal agency has spent over $1 billion funding diversity, equity, and inclusion programs, as we previously reported over at CarolinaJournal.com. And in December, Congresswoman Virginia Foxx said that DEI is being bagged up and placed on the curb come January, saying, quote, "It's time to take out the trash." Just last week, the Department of Education announced actions to eliminate DEI initiatives within the agency following an executive order from President Donald Trump. In addition to canceling internal DEI efforts, the department will work to identify and remove over 200 web pages from its website that housed DEI resources and encourage schools and institutions of higher education to promote or endorse harmful ideological programs. So obviously there is still a lot that can and likely will go on here. We will track this piece of legislation up in the 119th Congress and provide details as soon as we get them right here on the Carolina Journal News Hour. It's now 5:40, News Talk 1110, 99.3 WBT. As part of National School Choice Week, we are continuing our discussion this morning with Bob Lubke from the John Locke Foundation about our recent Carolina Journal poll focused on education across North Carolina. Let's switch over to education funding. This is, again, a common political thing that you'll hear over and over again on both sides of the political aisle. Democrats tend to be more of the mindset that we don't fund public education in an appropriate manner. Republicans have said, hey, we continue to give teachers raises. We continue to fund that system more and more. And this is a tough one for people to grasp. There was a question in the poll about financial support levels, and the numbers are really all over the place with where that funding level should be. And the plurality of people, 37% of them, said they're really unsure on the topic.
Yeah, that's indicative of, a public that really doesn't understand how schools are funded in North Carolina. And, we've been saying that a long time, and then it's caused us to ask a couple other questions on the poll, and we can talk about those later, Nick. But, yeah, this response really kind of surprised me a little bit. If you look at, the highest response that he said, unsure. They don't know how much funding, we should have for K-12 public schools, and that's disturbing. Parents, should have an idea of how this system works, and they should know how much education costs, how much the state's providing. They don't have to be wonkish about it, but we should have an idea of roughly what we're spending. Not only parents, obviously, administrators and so forth, but the fact that, so high a percentage of people really don't know what that number is, that's concerning.
A similar question also says, quote, North Carolina funds schools using a system of formulas that determine how much money districts receive for personnel, programs, and services. Some people advocate for a different system where funding is tied to the need of a child and follows the child whether he or she attends school. In your opinion, which way is a better model for North Carolina to fund public education? Yet at the same vein, Bob, over 60% of individuals, 60.8%, say that the current system using formulas is the way that they want it to continue going forward.
Yeah, 60% tied to the needs of students. Yeah, which is different than what we have right now. I think the funding formulas and the complexity of the current formulas really explains somewhat the answers that we got on the last question, which is, 37% of the people, don't know, what level we should finance the schools at, because they really don't understand. A state report said 5-6 years ago, when they evaluated the current formulas for funding schools, it said that it took the average school finance officer 2.5 years to understand how schools were funded. That's too complex. It takes too long. And it adversely impacts a lot of schools. So what we need really is a new system that where most of the money is tied to the needs of the differing needs of students, and not just the program needs. And the current system that we have now was really started about 100 years ago, and it was based on an agreement that said the state will provide the everyday instructional costs for local schools in exchange for local schools taking care of the capital and facility costs. That agreement has been in place for about 100 years, but there have been so many changes, and the current system is we try to keep up with those, but it's really too complex. It's inefficient. There's a lack of accountability and transparency in the current system, and it's really time that we look more closely at tying how we fund schools actually to the needs of students and not the needs of schools.
Great analysis this morning, Bob. Appreciate it. Bob Luebke, the director of the Center for Effective Education at the John Locke Foundation, joins us this morning on the Carolina Journal News Hour. And you can read more details on our poll by visiting our website, carolinajournal.com. It's now 5:45. News Talk 1110, 99.3 WBT. Another look at traffic this morning. We'll get an update with Boomer Von Cannon.
Hey, thanks.
hot. It's 5:49. Welcome back to the Carolina Journal News Hour, streaming live this morning on our Carolina Journal YouTube channel. You can also take the show with you on demand by checking out the podcast. It's available wherever you get your shows. Just search for the Carolina Journal News Hour in your favorite podcast app. Tap the subscribe or follow button, and you'll get a new show delivered to your smartphone each and every weekday morning. It's the Carolina Journal News Hour podcast. Download and subscribe now. Continuing our discussion this morning on FEMA, the future of the Federal Emergency Management Agency, President Donald Trump has named 4 individuals from North Carolina to this newly created council called the FEMA, the Federal Emergency Management Agency Review Council. They include Republican National Committee Chairman Michael Whatley, who was formerly the head of the North Carolina Republican Party from North Carolina. He's got some very deep roots and connections here, alongside Representative Chuck Edwards, Virginia Foxx, and Tim Moore. They were all named to that council, which was created by executive order by the president on Friday, shortly after he visited both the Asheville and Swannanoa areas touring hurricane relief, and his first visit outside of the district since being the elected and not sworn in as the 47th president of the United States. Now, the discussion of FEMA is nothing new. We've talked about it a lot here on the News Hour. They have faced intense scrutiny since Hurricane Helene, whether it was running out of money, allegedly avoiding homes with Trump signs, or last-minute decisions forcing victims out of hotels at the last hour. In November, former Federal Emergency Management Agency Administrator Diane Criswell was grilled at a Congressional Transportation and Infrastructure Subcommittee hearing about claims that the government agency wasn't doing enough to help Hurricane Helene and Milton victims. Milton affected portions of western Florida shortly after Helene. The president told reporters on Friday when he was in North Carolina that he believes disaster management should be led by the states and not the federal government. He said, whether it's a Democrat or Republican governor, you want to use your state to fix it and not waste time calling FEMA. This new agency, or this new review council, will consist of no more than 20 members and meet for 1 year to create a full-scale review by individuals highly experienced at effective disaster response and recovery, who will recommend to the president improvements or structural changes to promote the national interest and enable national resiliency. Newly sworn in Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem, as well as Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth, will serve as co-chairs of the council and oversee the committee. The council will produce a report for President Trump that will include an assessment of the adequacy of FEMA's response to disasters during the previous 4 years. So they're not just looking at Helene and Milton, they're going back 4 years. This includes questions of sufficiency of staffing and comparison of FEMA's response with both state, local, and private sector responses, includes timeliness of response, supplies provided, the efficiency of providing those supplies and services, which includes communication as well alongside other issues. All of that being looked at over the last 4 years. We did get some comments, including those from Congresswoman Virginia Foxx saying, quote, "The FEMA bureaucracy is failing the citizens of Western North Carolina. I wholeheartedly agree with President Trump's sentiment that if we cannot fix FEMA, it must be overhauled. I thank President Trump for appointing me to the council to assess the Federal Emergency Management Agency. I will work alongside my colleagues to hold FEMA's feet to the fire at every turn. Western North Carolina deserves nothing less." We also got some other comments coming in, including that from former North Carolina House Speaker Tim Moore. He's now a freshman congressman in D.C. He said, quote, "After leading unprecedented efforts to help our region recover from Hurricane Helene as the Speaker of the North Carolina House, I am deeply honored to be named by President Trump's newest task force and to assess and improve FEMA. The council's mission is clear. We must ensure that FEMA is prepared to respond swiftly and impartially to any disaster, prioritize American families, and focus on restoring the agency's core mission. I look forward to working with my fellow council members to provide solutions that promote efficiency, transparency, as well as accountability within FEMA while ensuring that taxpayer dollars go directly to helping families recover and rebuild. End quote there from Congressman and former House Speaker Tim Moore, as this Federal Emergency Management Agency Review Council does already have a couple of members named to it, including those here in North Carolina. We will, of course, keep a close eye on that. Speaking of hurricane recovery and relief, looking at the legislative calendar for the General Assembly today, when both the House and the Senate are set to convene at noon as they begin their 2025 long session. Coming up at 2 o'clock this afternoon, the House Select Committee on Helene Recovery will be meeting. We are expecting to get an update from the House side as to what exactly has gone on thus far. The chair of the group are John Bell and Dudley Green. They will be the ones overseeing this committee. We'll get some details on that today. We'll have updates on our website later on this afternoon at carolinajournal.com. And, of course, the latest news coming up for you tomorrow morning right here on the Carolina Journal News Hour. Well, education continues to be a major topic across the state. It is a National School Choice Week, after all, and we are learning details this morning on when the application window for the Opportunity Scholarship Program will open across the state. It will happen at 9 a.m. on February the 6th, so that is coming up next Thursday, a week from tomorrow, and will run for 1 month through March the 6th. That's according to a news release from the North Carolina State Education Assistance Authority. That is the group that is responsible for implementing the OSP program. Opportunity scholarships are available to all K-12 students and are a state voucher program designed to enable families to choose private education for their children. The program works in a set of tiers based on income level for a family, based on how many people are in the household, how many children, and what your level of income is. Well, each scholarship is now valued to receive at the minimum of $3,458 a year to a maximum of $7,686 a year, again, based on your family's income range. There is a full chart over on our website, carolinajournal.com. One thing to note, the figures are about a 3% increase from last year's numbers. Students in the lowest income tier do receive priority in regards to money being doled out of the program, and the General Assembly has already funded the program for the 25-26 school year, so next year's school season, at $625 million. So that is what we are learning this morning and tracking out of the North Carolina General Assembly as the Opportunity Scholarship Program kicks into another year here across the state. Again, you can view that full chart with breakdowns on income by visiting our website, carolinajournal.com. Well, that's going to do it for a Wednesday edition of the Carolina Journal News Hour. WBT News is next, followed by Good Morning BT. We are back tomorrow morning, 5 to 6, right here on News Talk 1110 and 99.3 WBT.